Everyone laughed at the waitress, helping a fallen old woman, until they learned she was the Mafia boss's mother. They say character is what you do when no one is watching. But in a room full of millionaires, everyone is always watching. They're just waiting for you to fail. You think you know power. You think it's the black card in your wallet or the limited edition sports car valeted out front. Darling, real power is the woman who wipes the floor with your ego while serving you lukewarm coffee. Today's story takes place in the most expensive restaurant in the city, where a spilled tray costs more than your rent, and kindness is the rarest item on the menu. A waitress, a fallen old woman, and a room full of laughter. But no one knew who walked through those doors next. Grab your popcorn, hit that like button, and get comfortable, because the bill is due, and George Peterson is coming to collect. The sound of shattering crystal was sharper than a slap. In the Gilded Cage, the city's most pretentious dining establishment, silence didn't fall gradually. It snapped into place like a loaded weapon. Hayley Lynn froze, a heavy silver tray balanced precariously on her left shoulder. Her wrist throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that had become her constant companion after double shifts 6 days a week. She didn't look at the broken glass first. She looked at the shoes surrounding it. Patent leather loafers, Jimmy Choo stilettos, python skin boots. And in the center of that circle of predatory footwear, a pair of worn-out, mud-stained canvas sneakers attached to a trembling, elderly body. The old woman, small and bird-like, in a coat that had seen better decades, lay sprawled on the checkerboard marble floor. A bread basket had overturned, scattering sourdough rolls like tumbleweeds across the pristine white tiles. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" a voice cut through the air. It was shrill, bored, and dripping with disdain. Monica Zhao leaned back in her velvet booth, twirling the stem of a Pinot Noir glass. "Walter, you really need to upgrade security. The homeless shelter is 3 blocks east." A ripple of laughter moved through the dining hall. It wasn't a warm sound. It was the dry, crackling sound of dry leaves burning. Hayley's eyes darted to the old woman. She was trying to push herself up, her hands shaking violently against the slick floor. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't dirty, not really. Just old and tired, and wearing clothes that whispered of a life left behind. I tripped," the old woman stammered, her voice raspy. She looked up, her eyes wide and milky behind thick, cracked spectacles. "I'm sorry. I just wanted a glass of water." "Water costs $10 here, Grandma." Courtney Sun, Monica's constant shadow and rival in cruelty, giggled. She nudged a sourdough roll with the toe of her red heel, kicking it just out of the old woman's reach as she tried to gather the mess. "Fetch." The laughter grew louder. It was a spectator sport now. The lunch rush crowd, investment bankers, trust fund babies and socialites had found their entertainment. Walter Hayes, the restaurant manager, materialized from the kitchen shadows. Walter was a man who sweated grease and anxiety. He wore a suit that was too tight, trying to mimic the wealth of his clientele, but only managing to look like a desperate undertaker. "What is this?" Walter hissed, marching toward the center of the room. He didn't look at the old woman with concern. He looked at her like a stain on a silk tie. "How did you get past the host stand?" "Get up. Get out." "I hurt my ankle," the woman whispered, wincing as she tried to put weight on her left foot. "Please, sir. Just a moment." "We don't have moments," Walter snapped, snapping his fingers for a busboy who was too terrified to move. "We have reservations. You are disturbing Mr. Watson's lunch." He gestured vaguely toward a corner booth where Harold Watson, a real estate mogul with a neck as thick as a tree stump, was chewing on a steak, watching the scene with mild amusement. "Get her out, Walter," Harold grunted, not bothering to swallow. "She smells like mothballs and failure. It's ruining the tartare." "You heard him," Walter barked. He reached down, not to help, but to grab the collar of the woman's oversized grey wool coat. "Come on, up, before I call the police for trespassing." The old woman gasped as he tugged. It was a rough, jerky motion. That was when the tray crashed. Hayley Lynn didn't drop it by accident. She slammed it down onto an empty table with enough force to make the silverware jump. The metallic clang echoed like a gong, severing the laughter instantly. Hayley marched into the circle. She was 24, tired, behind on rent, and currently running on caffeine and rage. Her uniform was stained with espresso, her hair was falling out of its bun, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was about to ruin her life. "Let go of her," Hayley said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Walter froze, his hand still gripping the wool coat. He looked at Hayley as if a toaster had just spoken to him. "Excuse me." "I said, let go," Hayley repeated, stepping between Walter and the woman on the floor. She crouched down, her movements gentle, ignoring the manager looming over her. "Don't touch her." "Hayley," Walter's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Do you know who is watching? Do you know what you are doing?" "I'm helping a human being, Walter," Hayley said, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were dark and fierce. "Something you forgot how to be a long time ago." Monica Zhao let out a loud, theatrical gasp. "Oh, scandalous. The help is rebelling. Is this part of the dinner show, Walter? Because I'm not paying extra for it." "Hayley," Walter snarled, his face flushing a blotchy red. "Get back to your station, now, or don't bother coming back." Hayley didn't look up. She was busy checking the old woman's ankle. It was swelling rapidly, turning a violent shade of purple against the pale skin. "It's sprained," Hayley said softly to the woman. "Maybe fractured. We need ice." "Leave her!" Walter shouted, losing his composure. The vein in his forehead bulged. "Security is coming. You walk away now, Hayley, or you're fired. Blacklisted. You'll never serve a table in this city again." The room held its breath. The threat was real. In this economy, in this city, a bad reference from the gilded cage was a death sentence for a service worker. Hayley paused. She looked at her hands, chapped from sanitizer and hot water. She thought about her empty fridge. She thought about the tuition bills piling up on her kitchen counter. Then she looked at the old woman. Behind those thick glasses, the woman wasn't crying. She was watching Hayley, studying her. There was something sharp in those grey eyes, something that didn't match the trembling posture, an intensity that felt like the moment before a lightning strike. "I'm sorry," the old woman whispered. "I caused you trouble." Hayley smiled. It was a sad, tired smile, but it was genuine. "Trouble is my middle name," Hayley said. She stood up, grabbed a linen napkin from a nearby table, snatching it right out from under Courtney Sun's elbow, and dipped it into an ice bucket. "Hey!" Courtney squawked. "Billing address is in the kitchen," Hayley deadpanned. She knelt back down and applied the cold compress to the woman's ankle. "That's it," Walter spat. "You're done. Get your things, and take the trash with you." Hayley didn't flinch. She helped the woman sit up, supporting her weight. "My name is Hayley," she told the woman, ignoring the shark circling them. "What's yours?" The woman adjusted her glasses. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of her withered lips. "Nicole," the woman said. "My name is Nicole Huang." The humiliation wasn't in the firing. It was in the audience. Walter Hayes didn't just want Hayley gone. He wanted her erased. He stood with his arms crossed, tapping his polished shoe, making sure every high-paying customer witnessed the consequences of defiance. Make sure she doesn't steal any silverware on the way out, Walter muttered to Bruce Miller, the head of security, who had finally lumbered into the dining room. Bruce was a mountain of a man, usually stoic, but even he looked uncomfortable. He liked Haley. She was the only one who saved him the good pastries from the morning delivery. He hesitated, looking from the small, fierce waitress to the trembling old woman she was supporting. "Boss, maybe we just call a cab," Bruce started, his voice a low rumble. "No cabs on the company account," Walter shrieked, his voice cracking. "She chose her side. She can walk." Haley wrapped her arm tighter around Nicole's waist. The old woman was surprisingly heavy, her frame dense, her grip on Haley's forearm like iron. "I can walk," Nicole said, though she leaned heavily on Haley. "I have family coming." "Family?" Monica Zhao laughed from her booth, popping a grape into her mouth. "What, are they bringing a shopping cart to wheel you home?" The table erupted in giggles again. Haley felt Nicole stiffen. For a second, she thought the old woman was going to collapse from shame. But when Haley looked down, she saw Nicole's jaw set. It wasn't the jaw of a victim. It was the jaw of a general surveying a battlefield. "Let's get you to a bench outside," Haley murmured, steering them toward the heavy oak doors. "I have a first aid kit in my bag. I can wrap that ankle properly." "You are foolish, child," Nicole said, her voice low as they shuffled past the mocking faces. "You just lost your livelihood for a stranger." "I can find another job," Haley lied. Her stomach churned with panic. She couldn't find another job. Not one that paid these tips. "I can't find another conscience." "Conscience doesn't pay the rent," Nicole noted dryly. "Neither does cruelty," Haley shot back. They reached the foyer. The air here was cooler, separated from the dining room by velvet ropes. Haley helped Nicole sit on a tufted ottoman, usually reserved for ladies waiting for their coats. Walter followed them, like a bad smell. "Not there," Walter snapped. "Outside, the curb." "She can't walk, Walter," Haley shouted, finally losing her temper. "Look at her foot. It's the size of a grapefruit." "Not my problem," Walter sneered. "This establishment maintains a standard. We don't have drifters loitering in the lobby." "I am waiting for my son," Nicole said. Her voice was calm now, eerily calm. "He is picking me up." "Your son?" Harold Watson had wandered over, picking his teeth with a toothpick. He loomed over the ottoman. "Does he drive a garbage truck? Tell him to pull around back." Nicole looked up at Harold. She slowly took off her thick, cracked glasses. Without the distortion of the lenses, her eyes were piercing. Dark, intelligent, and utterly fearless. "My son," Nicole said softly, "is very particular about punctuality. He should be here. Now." As if on cue, the heavy silence of the room was disturbed, not by a sound, but by a vibration. It was felt in the floorboards first, a deep, thrumming bass that rattled the expensive wine glasses on the shelves. It wasn't the rattle of a passing truck. It was the precise, heavy idle of an engine designed for war disguised as luxury. Through the frosted glass of the front doors, a shadow fell. A massive, sleek shape pulled up to the curb, blocking out the afternoon sun. "Delivery for the kitchen?" Walter frowned, checking his watch. "They're late." The double doors of the gilded cage didn't open. They were pushed. Two men entered first. They wore suits that cost more than Walter's car. They didn't look like customers. They looked like walls. They wore earpieces, and their eyes scanned the room with a professional, lethal detachment. They stepped aside, creating a corridor. Then he entered. George Peterson. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. George was not a man who blended in. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against a charcoal bespoke suit. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, a jaw carved from granite, eyes the color of cold steel. He didn't walk, he stalked. There was an arrogance in his stride that didn't come from money. It came from the absolute certainty that he could buy, or burn, everything in sight. He was the CEO of Peterson Holdings on paper. In the whispers of the city's underground, he was the dragon of the East, the man who controlled the shipping lanes, the unions, and half the politicians in the state. The dining room went silent. True silence, not the silence of shock, but the silence of prey recognizing a predator. Monica Zhao dropped her wine glass. It didn't break. It rolled onto the carpet, spilling red liquid like blood, but she didn't move to pick it up. Her face had gone ashen. Walter Hayes began to tremble. He knew who George Peterson was. Everyone did. George owned the building. George owned the block. George didn't look at the hostess. He didn't look at the bar. He walked straight into the center of the foyer, his eyes scanning until they landed on the ottoman. He stopped. He looked at the disheveled woman with the swollen ankle. He looked at the dirty sneaker. He looked at the waitress kneeling beside her, holding a bag of ice wrapped in a napkin. The expression on George Peterson's face didn't change, but the air around him seemed to crackle with violent electricity. He took 3 long strides and fell to one knee, not in supplication, but in service. "Mother," George said. His voice was deep, a baritone that vibrated in Haley's chest. "I told you to wait for the driver." The word echoed through the restaurant. "Mother." Walter Hayes made a sound like a dying radiator. Nicole Huang sighed, reaching out a trembling hand to pat the cheek of the most dangerous man in the city. "I wanted to see the new renovation, George. I wanted to see where our money was going." She paused, her eyes flickering over to Walter. "I have seen enough." George turned his head. He didn't stand up yet. He remained kneeling, but he turned his gaze toward Haley. Haley was frozen. She was holding an ice pack against the ankle of the Mafia Don's mother. She looked at George, terrified. He was devastatingly handsome up close, but terrifying. His eyes were scanning her face, noting the fatigue, the fear, the determination. "Who are you?" George asked. It wasn't a threat. It was a genuine question. "Haley," she whispered. I was the waitress." "Was?" George caught the word. "She was helping me," Nicole said, her voice sharpening. "When I fell, when they laughed." She pointed a shaking finger at Walter, then at Monica, then at Harold. George stood up. He rose to his full height, towering over everyone. He adjusted his cufflinks, a slow, deliberate movement that was more terrifying than if he had pulled a gun. He turned to the room. The silence was absolute. "Laughed," George repeated softly. He walked over to Monica's table. Monica was shaking so hard her earrings jingled. "You," George said, looking down at her. "You found my mother's pain amusing?" I didn't know," Monica squeaked. She looked like she needed help," George finished for her. He picked up the bottle of vintage wine on their table. He inspected the label. 1998. Good year. He dropped the bottle. It shattered on the table, splashing wine across Monica's white designer dress. She screamed, scrambling back. "Oops," George said, his face devoid of emotion. "Accidents happen. Funny, isn't it?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to Walter. Walter was backing away, hands raised. "Mr. Peterson, sir, please. It was a misunderstanding. We have strict policies about vagrants. Guests. You fired her," George said, gesturing to Haley without looking at her. She was disrupting the... "You fired the only person in this room with a soul." George stepped closer to Walter. Walter hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. George leaned in, his voice a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "You are not fired, Walter. That would be too easy. You are going to apologize. To her," he pointed at his mother, "and then to her," he pointed at Haley, "and then you are going to leave my city." "Leave the city?" Walter gasped. By midnight, George checked his watch. "If I see you in this zip code tomorrow, the police won't find you, because I will." George turned back to Haley. The darkness in his eyes vanished, replaced by something intense, curious, and unsettlingly focused. He walked over to her. He extended a hand. His palm was calloused, warm. "Up," he said gently. Haley took his hand. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. She felt small next to him, but not weak. "My mother has a difficult personality," George said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But she is a good judge of character. She says you helped when no one else would." "I just got some ice," Haley stammered, trying to pull her hand away, but he held it firm. "You did more than that," Nicole spoke up from the ottoman. "She lost her job for me, George. She stood up to the jackals." George nodded. He looked at Haley's name tag, then into her eyes. "Haley Lynn," he said, testing the name. "You're hired." What?" Haley blinked. "I don't want to work here anymore. The management is terrible." George threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, genuine sound that shocked his bodyguards. "Not here," George said. "For me. My mother needs a personal aide. Someone who doesn't care about money or status. Someone who isn't afraid of complications." He paused, stepping closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "And I need someone who can teach me." "Teach you what?" Haley breathed. "How to distinguish the gold from the dust," George said softly. "Come, we are leaving." "I can't just leave," Haley said, looking at her apron. "My shift." "Your shift is over," George declared. He turned to Bruce, his head of security. "Bruce, get the car. And Bruce?" "Yes, sir." "Buy the restaurant." Bruce didn't blink. "Yes, sir." "Buy it?" Walter shrieked from the corner. "You can't just buy the Gilded Cage." "I just did," George said calmly. "And I'm closing it down. I don't like the atmosphere." He scooped his mother up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He looked at Haley, tilting his head toward the door. "Coming, Miss Lynn?" Haley looked at the stunned diners. She looked at Monica, covered in wine. She looked at Walter, whose career had just evaporated. Then she looked at George Peterson, the most dangerous man in the city, waiting for her. She untied her apron, let it drop to the marble floor right next to the broken glass, and stepped over it. "I'm coming," she said. The interior of the SUV smelled of mahogany, leather, and something spicy, cinnamon and gunpowder. Haley sat on the plush leather seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Opposite her sat Nicole Huang, her leg now propped up on a specialized cushion that had extended from the car's floor. George sat next to his mother, tapping furiously on a tablet, his presence filling the confined space like a pressurized storm front. "You're staring," George said without looking up from the screen. Haley jumped. I'm sorry. I've just never been kidnapped before." Nicole let out a sharp cackle. "Kidnapped? Darling, this is a rescue. Did you see the look on that manager's face? Like a fish pulled out of water and slapped on concrete." "He was terrified," Haley said quietly. "You ruined his life." George finally looked up. He locked the tablet and set it aside. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing his face level with Haley's. The partition between the driver and the back was up. They were in a soundproof capsule, moving at 60 miles per hour. "I didn't ruin his life," George said, his voice smooth. He ruined it himself the moment he decided human dignity had a price tag. I just expedited the paperwork. Is that what you do? Haley asked, surprised by her own boldness. Expedite paperwork? George is a facilitator, Nicole answered for him, watching the interaction with hawk-like eyes. He facilitates solutions. And problems, Haley muttered. George's lips quirked upward. You have a sharp tongue, Haley Lynn. Most people lose their voice when they get in this car. I'm too tired to be scared, Haley admitted. She looked out the tinted window. The city was blurring past. Where are we going? The estate, George said. We have a private doctor on staff. He will look at Mother's ankle, and he will look at that bruise on your wrist. Haley instinctively covered her wrist. It's nothing, just carpal tunnel from carrying trays. It's a bruise, George corrected. I saw Walter grab you, before you intervened. Haley went silent. He had seen everything. I checked your file, George said, casually, picking up a folder that hadn't been there a moment ago. My file? Haley's eyes widened. I've been in the car for 5 minutes. Bruce is efficient, George shrugged. Haley Lynn, age 24, dropped out of medical school 2 years ago, top of your class. Why did you leave? That's none of your business, Haley snapped. The wound was still fresh. Financial hardship, George read, ignoring her protest. Father passed away. Debts inherited. Younger brother, Leo, sick. Kidney issues. Haley lunged. She didn't think. She just reacted. She reached across the gap to snatch the folder. Stop it! You have no right! She expected him to recoil. Instead, George caught her hand mid-air. His grip was gentle, but immovable. He held her hand suspended between them. The contact sent a jolt through her arm that had nothing to do with pain. I'm not mocking you, George said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate, serious. I need to know who I am bringing into my home, into my mother's life. I'm not going into your life, Haley said, trying to pull her hand back. I helped a lady. That's it. Drop me off at the next corner. I can pay for Leo's treatment, George said. The air left Haley's lungs. She stopped struggling. What? Your brother, Leo. He's on the transplant list, but he's low priority because of insurance gaps. I can fix that. Today, Haley stared at him. This man was offering her a miracle wrapped in a threat. Why? Because you helped her. George nodded toward Nicole, who was feigning sleep but listening to every word. In my world, Haley, loyalty is the only currency that matters. You showed loyalty to a stranger. That is rare. I pay my debts. And what do I have to do? Haley asked, her voice trembling. What does the facilitator want in return? George leaned back, releasing her hand. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her determined face. My mother needs a companion, someone who can handle medical needs, so your training is useful. But more importantly, someone who isn't afraid of me. Someone who won't just say yes to everything I say. I definitely won't do that, Haley said. Clearly, George murmured. The job pays $10,000 a month, plus full medical for you and Leo, and you live at the estate. 10,000. It was an astronomical sum. It was freedom. It was Leo's life. And if I say no, then I drop you at the corner, George said simply, and you go back to finding a job in a city where I just bought your references. You're a bully, Haley whispered. I am a businessman, George corrected, and I am a son who nearly lost his mother today, because the world is full of Walters. I am hiring a bodyguard, Haley. Not for her body, but for her heart. I need you to keep the vultures away. The car slowed down. The heavy iron gates of a massive estate rolled open. A sprawling mansion, lit up like a fortress, came into view. "We are here," Nicole announced, opening her eyes. She looked at Haley. "Take the deal, girl. The food is better than the restaurant, and the company is interesting." The car stopped. The door was opened from the outside by a man with a scarred face. George waited. He didn't push. He just watched her with those intense, steel-grey eyes. "Well?" George asked. Haley thought of Leo, lying in his bed, pale and tired. She thought of the unpaid bills. She thought of Walter's face. She looked at George Peterson. He was dangerous. He was darkness wrapped in a bespoke suit. But he loved his mother enough to burn a restaurant to the ground. "I need every other weekend off," Haley said. George smiled. It was a real smile this time, dazzling and dangerous. "Done." He stepped out of the car and offered his hand again. This time Haley took it. As she stepped out onto the gravel driveway, a black sedan sped up the drive, screeching to a halt behind them. George's smile vanished. His face hardened into stone. A man jumped out of the sedan. He was wearing a police uniform, but he looked disheveled. "Mr. Peterson," the cop shouted, "we have a problem. The East Side shipment, it's gone. Someone hit the warehouse." George didn't let go of Haley's hand. In fact, he pulled her slightly behind him, placing his body between her and the news. "Who?" George asked, his voice ice cold. "It was Dennis Grant," the cop panted. "He left a message. He said he heard you were going soft, playing nursemaid." George's jaw tightened. He looked at his mother, then at Haley. "Soft," George repeated. He looked at the mansion, then back at the trembling cop. "Tell the crew to prepare the cars. We're going out tonight." "George," Nicole warned from the car. "Go inside, Mother. Take Haley. Show her to the guest wing." George finally released Haley's hand. His fingers brushed against her palm, a lingering touch. "Stay inside, Haley. Tonight is going to be loud." Haley watched as George walked toward the cop, shedding the persona of the dutiful son and fully becoming the Don. "What did I just sign up for?" Haley whispered. Nicole limped up beside her, leaning on a cane Bruce had produced. "Life, my dear," Nicole said, her eyes gleaming. "You just signed up for life. Now help me inside. I want to see if the chef can make a decent tartar without the side of attitude." As the heavy oak doors of the mansion closed behind them, Haley heard the distant, distinct sound of a gun being cocked. She wasn't serving tables anymore. She was sitting at the head of the wildest table in the city, and she had no idea if she was a guest or the main course. The guest wing was a misnomer. It was a palace within a fortress. Haley had an apartment larger than the entire house she grew up in, complete with a balcony that overlooked a garden filled with night-blooming jasmine. Though, true to the owner's nature, the garden was surrounded by 12-foot walls, topped with censers. 2 days had passed since the incident at the Gilded Cage, 2 days of silence from George Peterson. Haley adjusted the bandage on Nicole Huang's ankle. The swelling had gone down significantly, though the bruising was a spectacular shade of violet. They were in the sunroom, a glass-walled enclosure where the morning light was ruthless, exposing every dust mote and every worry line. "You're wrapping it too tight," Nicole criticized, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "I need circulation, girl, not amputation." "It's perfect compression," Haley countered, not backing down. She had learned quickly that Nicole Huang didn't respect obedience. She respected competence. "If I loosen it, you'll be limping for another week. Do you want to limp, or do you want to dance?" Nicole lowered her reading glasses. "I haven't danced since 1985. But I suppose walking without looking like a wounded duck would be preferable." She paused, studying Haley. You haven't asked about him. Haley froze for a fraction of a second before securing the clip. About who? Don't play coy. It bores me, Nicole snapped. My son. He hasn't been home in 48 hours. Most employees would be relieved. The boss is away. The mice can play. But you keep checking the driveway. I'm checking for the courier, Haley lied smoothly. My brother's transfer papers for the private clinic were supposed to arrive this morning. George handled that personally before he left. Nicole waved a hand dismissively. Leo is already in the VIP wing of St. Jude's. Dialysis scheduled, nephrologist assigned. You'd know that if you checked your phone instead of staring out the window. Haley blinked. She pulled her phone from her pocket. There was a text from an unknown number, sent at 3 a.m. the previous night. He's safe. Focus on Mother. Haley felt a flush rise to her cheeks. He works fast. He works thoroughly, Nicole corrected. George doesn't do half measures, which is why I'm worried. The front doors of the estate slammed open. It wasn't a normal entrance. It was an arrival that shook the floorboards. Haley was on her feet instantly. Stay here, she ordered Nicole. Don't you dare give me orders in my own house, Nicole shouted, grabbing her cane. But Haley was already running. She reached the grand foyer just as Bruce Miller came through the doors, supporting a figure that looked like it had gone 10 rounds with a wrecking ball. George. His charcoal suit was ruined, slashed at the sleeve and stained with something darker than wine. He was limping, favoring his right side, and his face was a mask of exhaustion and adrenaline. But his eyes were wide open, scanning the perimeter even as he stumbled. Get the doctor, Bruce barked at a maid who was cowering by the stairs. No doctor, George grunted, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. I'm fine, just whiskey and a stitching kit. He looked up and saw Haley standing at the end of the hallway. She wasn't cowering. She was analyzing. You look terrible, Haley said, walking toward him. George let out a dry, pained chuckle. Nice to see you too, Miss Lynn. How is my mother? Better than you, Haley said. She reached him, ignoring Bruce's warning glare. She reached out and touched the fabric near the tear in his sleeve. This is deep. It's still bleeding. It's a scratch, George lied. It's an arterial graze if you're unlucky, Haley snapped. Bruce, get him to the study. I need warm water, iodine, sutures, and clean towels, now. We have a medical team on retainer, Bruce started. They are 20 minutes away, Haley cut him off. He's bleeding through a $3,000 suit right now. Move! Bruce looked at George. George gave a barely perceptible nod. 10 minutes later, George was sitting on a leather sofa in his study, shirtless. Haley was trying very hard to focus on the wound on his upper arm, and not on the fact that the Dragon of the East was built like a Greek statue, carved from scar tissue and muscle. His torso was a map of violence, old knife wounds, a bullet scar near his ribs, and fading bruises. You're staring again, George murmured, wincing slightly as she cleaned the jagged cut with iodine. I'm assessing, Haley corrected, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Who did this? Business competitors, George said vaguely. Dennis Grant has aggressive negotiation tactics. He tried to kill you, Haley stated. He tried to send a message, George corrected. He watched her work, his eyes tracking the precise movements of her fingers. He thinks I'm distracted. He thinks bringing you and Mother into the house makes me vulnerable. Haley paused, the needle hovering over his skin. Does it? George looked at her. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the scent of antiseptic and raw masculinity. It makes the stakes higher, George said softly. Finish the stitch, Haley, before I bleed on the rug. She worked in silence for a few minutes, tying off the suture with a professional knot. She taped it, cleaned the area, and sat back. "You need antibiotics," she said, "and rest. Actual sleep, not just closing your eyes while holding a gun." George rolled his shoulder, testing the stitches. "I have a gala tomorrow night." "You have a death wish," Haley countered. "The mayor's charity ball," George continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Dennis Grant will be there. If I don't show up, he wins. He proves I'm weak. He proves he hurt me." "You are hurt," Haley exclaimed, gesturing to his arm. "Pain is information," George said, standing up. He towered over her, the heat radiating from his skin, making her dizzy. "Weakness is letting them see it. I am going to that ball, Haley, and you are coming with me." "Me?" Haley laughed nervously. "I don't do balls. I do shift work and take out noodles. I don't even own a dress." George walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a black velvet box. He tossed it to her. She caught it, surprised by the weight. "Mother selected the dress. It will be in your room by evening," George said. "Open the box." Haley opened it. Inside sat a diamond necklace, so brilliant it seemed to trap the light from the room. It wasn't gaudy. It was elegant, lethal, and colder than ice. "It's beautiful," Haley whispered. "But I can't wear this. It's a collar," George said, his voice darkening. He walked around the desk and stood behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his breath on her neck. "Dennis Grant needs to know that you are under my protection, that you are off limits. If you wear my diamonds, the city knows you belong to the Peterson house." "I don't belong to anyone," Haley said, snapping the box shut. She turned to face him. George looked down at her, a complicated expression warring in his eyes, admiration, frustration, and something hotter. "Then pretend," George whispered, "for one night. Pretend you are mine, to keep yourself alive." The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sea of silk, jewels, and hypocrisy. A string quartet played Mozart in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the roar of gossip. Haley Lynn felt like an imposter. The dress Nicole had chosen was a weapon in silk form, emerald green, backless, and hugging every curve of her body before flowing to the floor. The diamonds George had given her rested cold against her collarbone. She held George's arm, not for appearances, but for balance. He walked through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. People didn't just move out of his way. They evaporated. "Smile," George murmured, his hand warm on the small of her back. "You look like you're walking to the gallows." "I'd prefer the gallows," Haley muttered through gritted teeth. "At least the executioner wears a hood. These people just stare." "Let them stare," George said, pulling her closer. "They've never seen anything real before." They moved toward the center of the room. Haley spotted familiar faces. Monica Zhao was there, wearing a dress that cost more than Haley's life's earnings, holding court near the champagne fountain. When Monica saw Haley, her jaw dropped. She looked from Haley to George, and the color drained from her face. She turned and practically ran toward the terrace. "Power," George noted, seeing the interaction. "It's not about fear, it's about presence." "It seems a lot like fear," Haley replied. "Peterson!" The voice boomed across the room, cutting through the polite chatter. A man emerged from the crowd. He was the opposite of George. Where George was dark, sharp, and tailored, this man was golden, broad, and loud. He wore a white tuxedo jacket that should have looked ridiculous, but somehow looked dangerous on him. Dennis Grant, the man who had ordered the hit on the warehouse, the man who had put the stitches in George's arm. George's grip on Haley's waist tightened imperceptibly. "Steady," he whispered. "George!" Dennis grinned, spreading his arms wide. "I heard you had a little accident. A scratch? I was so worried I almost sent flowers." "Save your flowers for your funeral, Dennis," George said smoothly, his voice level. "I'm fine, as you can see." Dennis's eyes drifted to George's arm, looking for a sign of weakness, a flinch. George held his champagne glass in his injured hand, steady as a rock. Disappointed, Dennis turned his gaze to Haley. His eyes raked over her, stripping her bare. It was a violation. "And who is this?" Dennis stepped closer, invading Haley's personal space. "I didn't know you had a taste for exotics, George. She's stunning. Where did you find her? One of your import crates?" Haley felt George tense. It was the tension of a coiled spring about to snap. She knew that if George hit him here, in front of the mayor and the police commissioner, everything would fall apart. She stepped forward, intercepting Dennis's gaze. "He found me at the Gilded Cage," Haley said, her voice clear and projecting. "I was taking out the trash. Speaking of which, didn't I see you getting kicked out of there last month for declining credit cards?" The circle of socialites around them gasped. Silence descended. Dennis's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. "I don't have credit problems, sweetheart. I own the bank." "Then you should buy a better tailor," Haley said, looking at his white jacket. "Because the stitching on that lapel is uneven. It looks cheap." A stifled laugh came from somewhere in the crowd. Dennis Grant turned purple. George didn't laugh. He looked at Haley with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "She has a bite," Dennis hissed, stepping back. He looked at George. "Keep her on a leash, Peterson, or someone might decide to cut it." "She's not on a leash, Dennis," George said softly, his voice dropping to that lethal register. "She's at my side, and if you ever look at her again, I will take your eyes. Are we clear?" Dennis stared at George. He saw the lack of hesitation. He saw the monster behind the tuxedo. "Enjoy the party, George," Dennis spat. "The night is young." He turned and disappeared into the crowd. George let out a breath he had been holding. He guided Haley toward the balcony doors, away from the prying eyes. The night air was cool. The city lights twinkled below them, oblivious to the war happening in the ballroom. "You are insane," George said, leaning against the stone railing. "You insulted Dennis Grant to his face, about his tailor." "He was looking at me like I was a side of beef," Haley said, shivering slightly. "I don't like bullies." George took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. "You saved me back there," George admitted. "If you hadn't spoken, I was going to kill him. Right there on the parquet floor. That would have been messy," Haley said, pulling the jacket tighter. "Haley." George turned her to face him. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed her lower lip. The atmosphere shifted. The adrenaline of the confrontation faded, leaving behind a raw, magnetic pull. "Why are you doing this?" George asked. "You could have run. You could have taken the money for Leo and left." "I don't run," Haley whispered, looking up into his eyes. "And maybe I'm tired of seeing good people get hurt by bad ones." "I am a bad one, Haley," George said, his forehead resting against hers. "Make no mistake, I have done things that would make you have nightmares." "You love your mother," Haley said. "You saved my brother. You gave me your coat. That doesn't redeem me." "It's a start," she said. George closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked vulnerable. He leaned in, the distance between them closing to nothing. Haley's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She wanted to know what the fire felt like. A loud crack shattered the moment. Stone exploded from the railing inches from George's head. George moved faster than human thought. He didn't duck. He tackled Haley, throwing his body over hers as they crashed to the balcony floor. Another shot rang out. A sniper. "Stay down!" George roared, shielding her head with his hand. He dragged her toward the cover of a stone planter. "George!" Haley screamed, seeing fresh blood bloom on the shoulder of his white shirt. The same shoulder, the same wound. "I'm fine!" George shouted, pulling a handgun from a hidden holster at the small of his back. "Bruce! Balcony! Now!" The ballroom erupted in screams. The glass doors shattered. George looked at Haley beneath him. His eyes were wild, terrifying, and fiercely protective. "I told you!" George rasped, aiming the gun at the darkness of the opposing rooftop. "The night is young." The drive back to the estate was a blur of speed and shouting. The SUV was armored, bullets pinging off the glass like hail. Haley was in the back seat, her hands pressed hard against George's shoulder. The stitches she had put in earlier had torn open, and the new impact from the bullet, it had grazed him, thankfully, not penetrated deep, had turned his shirt into a crimson rag. "Drive faster!" Haley yelled at the driver. "We can't miss. We have tails!" Bruce shouted from the front seat. He was firing a submachine gun out the window. George was pale, sweating profusely. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the blood loss was catching up. "Haley," George mumbled, his hand gripping her wrist so hard it bruised. If they stop the car, you run. You understand? You run to the safe house." "Shut up," Haley commanded, her voice cracking. "Nobody is running. You are going to live, you stubborn idiot." They screeched through the gates of the estate. The guards were already returning fire at the pursuing vehicles. The heavy iron gates slammed shut, sealing them in. They carried George into the kitchen. It was the closest room with bright lights and a large table. "Get the kit," Haley screamed at the staff. "The big kit, and I need O-negative blood. You have a supply, don't you? Tell me you have a supply." "Refrigerated unit in the pantry," Bruce yelled, ripping George's shirt open. Nicole Huang hobbled into the kitchen. She took one look at her son bleeding on the prep table, and her face went stone cold. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. "Secure the perimeter," Nicole ordered Bruce, her voice like a whip. "Kill anyone who isn't family. Haley, is he dying?" "Not if I can help it," Haley said, snapping on latex gloves. "He tore the artery this time. I need to clamp it. Now." The next hour was a nightmare of blood and metal. Haley wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a dropout. She was a surgeon. She worked with a terrifying focus, her hands deep inside the wound, clamping, tying, cleaning. George was conscious for the first part. He watched her. He didn't make a sound, even when the pain must have been blinding. He just watched her face. "You're good," he whispered before the morphine finally pulled him under. When Haley finally tied the last stitch and stepped back, her green dress was ruined. Her hands were stained red, up to the elbows. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She slumped against the refrigerator. Nicole walked over. She handed Haley a glass of water. "Drink," Nicole commanded. Haley drank. She looked at George, sleeping fitfully on the table, an IV line running into his arm. "He saved me," Haley whispered. "On the balcony. He threw himself in front of me." "He loves you," Nicole said simply. Haley looked at the old woman. "He doesn't even know me. It's been 3 days. Time is irrelevant to men like George," Nicole said, brushing a stray hair from Haley's forehead. "He decides, and then he acts. He decided on you the moment you handed me that ice pack. But tonight confirmed it." "Confirmed what?" "That you are the weakness Dennis Grant was looking for," Nicole said grimly. "And that makes you the most dangerous thing in this house." Haley looked at her bloody hands. She thought about the sniper. She thought about Dennis Grant's smile. I should leave, Haley said. For his safety. I'm a liability. If you leave now, Nicole said, leaning close, he will burn the city down to find you, and he will die doing it. You are in the game now, Haley. The only way out is to win. George groaned on the table. Haley was at his side in an instant, checking his pulse, his temperature. He opened his eyes. They were hazy, unfocused, but they found her face. Stay, he rasped. Haley placed her hand over his. She felt the steady, strong beat of his heart. She looked at the blood on her dress, the diamonds around her neck, and the man who had taken a bullet for her. She realized with a jolt of terror that she didn't want to leave. I'm staying, Haley whispered. George's eyes closed, a look of peace settling over his sharp features. Haley turned to Nicole. The fear was gone from Haley's eyes, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She looked like a queen who had just claimed her throne. Tell Bruce I want a meeting, Haley said. Nicole raised an eyebrow. A meeting? With the security team, Haley said. Dennis Grant thinks we're playing defense. I want to know how to play offense. Nicole smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Welcome to the family, dear. The war room of the Peterson estate was buried 3 floors beneath the garden. It was a bunker of steel and glass, filled with monitors displaying shipping routes, stock tickers, and surveillance feeds. The air was recycled and cold, smelling of ozone and stale coffee. Bruce Miller stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking uncomfortable. He was used to taking orders from George, a man who spoke in commands. He was not used to taking orders from a 24-year-old former waitress wearing a blood-stained evening gown and a man's oversized blazer. This is insane, Bruce rumbled, crossing his massive arms. You want to invite him here? Into the house? After he put a sniper on the roof? Because he put a sniper on the roof, Haley corrected, leaning over the table. Her exhaustion had vanished, replaced by a frantic, razor-sharp clarity. Dennis Grant thinks George is dying. He saw the blood. He knows he hit the target. If we go dark, he'll think we're weak, and he'll send an army to finish the job. We don't have the numbers to fight a siege, Bruce. You told me that yourself. We have the perimeter, Bruce argued. We can hold them off for days. And then what? Haley snapped. George needs recovery time, not a war zone. We need to stop the attack before it starts. We need to give Dennis what he wants. And what is that? Nicole Huang's voice drifted from the corner. She sat in a leather armchair, her injured foot propped up, a shotgun resting casually across her lap. Submission, Haley said. He called George soft. He thinks George is compromised by emotion. So we show him he's right. We invite him to a parley. We tell him George is critical, and we are ready to negotiate terms of surrender. George will never agree to that. Bruce shook his head. He'd rather die standing. George isn't awake to argue, Haley lied. She looked at the monitors. Dennis is a narcissist. I saw it at the party. The white tuxedo. The need to be the center of attention. He won't send a hit squad if he thinks he can walk in through the front door and accept the crown personally. He wants the victory lap. We give him the stage. And when he walks in, Bruce asked, he won't come alone. He'll bring his elite guard. Let him, Haley said. Her eyes drifted to the blueprint of the house displayed on the central screen. He thinks this is a mansion. He doesn't know it's a fortress. We don't need to outgun him, Bruce. We just need to outsmart him. I need access to the HVAC controls, the fire suppression system, and the wine cellar. Bruce blinked. The wine cellar? Dennis likes the finer things, Haley said, a dark smile touching her lips. Let's prepare a vintage he won't forget. The sound of the elevator doors opening made them all turn. George Peterson stood there. He was pale, leaning heavily against the doorframe, his arm in a sling. He wore loose linen pants and a fresh shirt that was already spotting with blood at the shoulder. But his eyes were clear. "You should be in bed," Haley admonished, rushing to his side to support him. George waved her off but didn't push her away. He looked at the map on the screen, then at Bruce, and finally at Haley. "Surrender?" George asked, his voice rough. "A feint," Haley said, holding his gaze. "A Trojan horse. We open the gates so we can close them behind him." George studied her face. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had made her stand up to Walter Hayes in the restaurant. He saw a woman who wasn't just surviving his world, but rewriting the rules of it. "He will come heavy," George warned. 12 men, minimum. Automatic weapons. "I know," Haley said, "but they'll be expecting a dying king and a scared girl. They won't be expecting this." George looked at his mother. Nicole nodded slowly, racking the slide of her shotgun with a metallic clack. "I like her plan, George," Nicole said. "It's devious. It's dramatic. It's something your father would have done." George looked back at Haley. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. "Okay," George said. "Call him. Tell him I'm fading fast. Tell him the Queen is ready to hand over the keys." Midnight brought a storm and a convoy of black SUVs. Dennis Grant marched into the grand foyer like a conqueror, flanked by 6 armed men. "Cozy," Dennis sneered at Haley, who stood alone at the stairs in a severe black suit. "Where is the body?" "In the library," Haley said, keeping her voice steady. "He wants to sign the transfer before the end." Dennis laughed, touching the diamonds at her throat. "Smart girl. Lead the way." In the dim library, George sat by the fire, looking defeated. A single document lay on the desk next to a decanter of wine. "Total abdication," Dennis mused, picking up the pen. "You really are broken, George." He signed the paper, then poured himself a glass of the vintage wine. "To the fall of the House of Peterson." He drank. 10 seconds later, the glass shattered on the floor. Dennis collapsed to his knees, clawing at his throat, his body seizing. "Scopolamine," Haley stated coldly, "mixed with a muscle relaxant, tasteless in a vintage that old. Poison," Dennis wheezed. "Paralysis," George said, standing up and shedding his blanket to reveal a submachine gun. The frailty was gone. "You called me soft, Dennis. You were wrong." As the fire suppression system triggered outside to neutralize Grant's men, Haley retrieved the pen from Dennis's limp fingers. "He's all yours," Haley said, turning to leave the room as George stepped forward to settle the final debt. The gilded cage was gone, reborn as the open hearth. The velvet ropes were trash. The atmosphere was warm, loud, and alive. Haley Lynn stood in the center of the room, not in an apron, but in a tailored cream suit. She checked her clipboard, directing the flow of the lunch rush with a conductor's grace. The bell chimed. The room went quiet, a silence born of respect, not fear. George Peterson walked in. The weight on his shoulders was lighter, his arm fully healed, save for a jagged scar he wore with pride. He approached Haley, ignoring the eyes on him. "Table for 2, he teased, his eyes dancing. "Do you have a reservation?" Haley smiled, tapping her pen. "I own the building. We reserve the right to refuse service to trouble." George laughed, a rich sound that filled the room. He gently took the clipboard from her hands, tossed it aside, and pulled her into a kiss that stopped time, a public declaration of victory. "Mother needs you," he murmured against her lips. "And Leo is waiting for his soccer game. The accounts are settled, Haley." "Not all of them," she pulled back, grinning. "You owe me lunch. Taco truck on 5th. Plastic chairs." "Plastic chairs," George agreed, offering his arm. They walked out into the sunlight, hand in hand, leaving the shadows behind. "Are we good people, George?" she asked on the sidewalk. He looked at the peaceful street, then at her. "We are necessary people, and that is enough." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you flip the script. They thought she was a victim. She turned out to be the vanguard. They thought he was a monster. He turned out to be a martyr. In a world obsessed with appearances, Hayley Lynn and George Peterson proved that the only thing sharper than a knife is the truth, and the only thing stronger than fear is family. Dennis Grant learned the hard way. Never judge a book by its cover, and never, ever laugh at the waitress. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of revenge, romance, and righteous justice, smash that like button until it breaks. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Comment below. Would you have taken the deal to live at the estate, or would you have run for the hills? Let me know. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know who you're really talking to.